Here is a revised version of the story, where the man is described as an ordinary, well-groomed passerby of around 35 years old. Sarah Thompson stepped off the subway, her heels clicking on the pavement as she hurried through the bustling streets of New York City. Her heart was pounding. She was already late for work. "I'm going to be late," Sarah muttered to herself as she navigated through the throngs of pedestrians. "Mr. Jenkins is going to kill me." She paused momentarily outside the corner coffee shop, debating whether to waste precious minutes getting coffee. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't had time for breakfast. Making a decision, Sarah dashed inside. "I won't survive today without caffeine." "Good morning, Doris," she greeted the elderly waitress. "The usual, please, and make it quick. I'm running late." Doris smiled knowingly. "I understand, dear," she replied, hastily pouring the coffee into a paper cup. "It's terrible, isn't it?" Sarah smiled as she paid. "Thank you, Doris. You've saved my life," she called out, rushing back to the street. She maneuvered through the crowd, sipping the steaming coffee, her mind racing with the conversation she needed to have with her boss. "Mr. Jenkins, I know I'm late, but," Sarah rehearsed her excuses. "No, that won't work. Maybe. Sir, I sincerely apologize for." Suddenly, her eyes fell on a young man in his mid-30s wearing a business suit. Something about his gait made Sarah uneasy. The man staggered strangely and leaned against a building wall, his face pale. Sarah stopped, watching him anxiously. None of the other passers-by seemed to notice the man. "Hey, sir," Sarah called uncertainly. "Are you okay?" The man glanced at her, confused. "I'm not sure," he murmured. "Something doesn't feel right." Suddenly, his eyes rolled back, and he began to collapse. Sarah barely managed to catch him in time, preventing his head from hitting the pavement. "Help!" she shouted, looking around. "Someone call an ambulance." A few bystanders paused, watching curiously, but nobody moved to assist. Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" came the operator's voice. "Hello, there's a man on the street. He's unconscious," Sarah spoke quickly. "Please send an ambulance." "Don't worry, ma'am. Can you tell me your exact location?" Sarah glanced around, trying to find a street sign. "It's the corner of 5th Avenue and 23rd Street, right in front of Joe's Cafe." "Okay, an ambulance is on its way. Stay on the line. Can you check if the victim is breathing?" Sarah leaned in closer to the man, listening. "Yes, he's breathing, but it's very weak and irregular." "I see. Can you feel a pulse?" Sarah took the man's hand, trying to find a pulse on his wrist. "I think so, but it's very faint." "You're doing great. The ambulance will arrive in a few minutes. Stay with him and keep monitoring." Sarah held the man's hand, feeling panic rising within her. "Please hang on," she whispered. "Help is coming." Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Sarah didn't take her eyes off the man's pale face, praying he would keep breathing. A small crowd began to gather around them. "Does anyone know him?" Sarah asked, looking around, but nobody responded. Finally, she heard the much-anticipated sound of sirens. "Thank God," Sarah breathed as the ambulance pulled up beside her. Two paramedics jumped out, carrying a stretcher. "What do we have here?" one of them asked, kneeling next to the man. "He was walking down the street, and I saw him collapse," Sarah explained quickly. "He lost consciousness. His breathing is weak, and his pulse is barely there." "You did the right thing," the paramedic nodded, checking the man's vital signs. "Jim, prepare the defibrillator. It looks like a heart attack." They quickly loaded the man onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Sarah followed hesitantly. "Ma'am, are you a relative?" the second paramedic asked. "No, I'm just," Sarah hesitated. "I can't just leave him like this. Can I come with you?" The paramedics exchanged a glance. "We don't usually allow non-relatives, but okay, get in. We might need information." Sarah climbed into the ambulance, her heart pounding as she watched the paramedics work urgently, connecting the patient to machines and administering medication. "Hold on, sir," she whispered, clenching her fists. "You're going to make it." At the hospital, everything happened in a blur. The man was rushed to intensive care, and Sarah found herself in the emergency room. Looking around in confusion, "Miss, are you here with a patient?" A nurse approached her. "We need to fill out some paperwork." "Yes, of course," Sarah nodded, stepping up to the reception desk. "Are you a relative?" "No, I was there when he got sick." The nurse raised an eyebrow, surprised. "And you came to the hospital with him? You're very kind." Sarah shrugged, embarrassed. "I couldn't just leave him there." "Well, we still need a contact person on file. Would you mind being listed?" "Sure, no problem," Sarah agreed, giving her information. After completing the paperwork, she sank exhausted into a plastic chair in the hallway. The adrenaline had worn off, and Sarah suddenly realized how tired she was. She looked at the clock and gasped, "I'm 3 hours late for work." Sarah jumped up, thinking frantically about what to do. Part of her wanted to stay at the hospital and find out about the man's condition, but she knew that if she delayed any longer, she would lose her job. At that moment, a doctor emerged from the ICU. "Miss Thompson?" "Yes, that's me." Sarah hurried over. "He's stabilized," the doctor smiled. "The patient had a heart attack, but without your timely help, it could have been much worse. You probably saved his life." Sarah's legs felt weak with relief. "Thank God," she whispered. "We'll keep monitoring him, but the worst is over," the doctor continued. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Thompson. We could use more people like you." Sarah smiled shyly. "I just did what anyone should do." "Unfortunately, not everyone would have." The doctor shook his head. "You can be proud of yourself." After saying goodbye to the doctor, Sarah rushed out of the hospital and hailed a taxi. She realized she couldn't afford such a luxury but didn't care at that moment. "To the office, please, and as fast as possible," she instructed the driver. During the ride, Sarah nervously fidgeted with her purse strap, imagining her boss's angry rant. Mr. Jenkins was known for his bad temper and didn't tolerate lateness. When the taxi pulled up in front of the office, Sarah took a deep breath and composed herself. "I've been through worse," she muttered as she got out of the car. The usual office bustle greeted her as she entered, with co-workers casting surprised glances but not daring to speak to her. "Sarah." "Jen, Mr. Jenkins's secretary," called. "Where have you been?" "The boss is furious." "I'll explain everything," Sarah sighed. "Is he in his office?" Jen nodded sympathetically. "Yes, and you'd better hurry. Good luck." Sarah knocked on the office door. "Come in," a gruff voice responded. She entered, feeling her knees tremble. Mr. Jenkins was sitting behind his desk, glaring at her. "Miss Thompson," he hissed, "you finally decided to show up?" "Mr. Jenkins, I can explain," Sarah began. "Explain?" Mr. Jenkins exploded. "You're 3 hours late." 3 hours? Do you realize we almost lost an important deal because of you?" "Sir, Silence," Mr. Jenkins shouted. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You've let down the entire company with your irresponsible behavior. Pack your things, Miss Thompson. You're fired." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. "Please, Mr. Jenkins, listen to me. I saved a man's life." The boss scoffed derisively. "Oh, really? And who might that be?" Sarah took a deep breath and recounted the entire story. About the man who fell ill on the street, the ambulance, and the hospital. When she finished, silence filled the office. "You expect me to believe this ridiculous story?" Mr. Jenkins finally said. "It's true," Sarah exclaimed. "I can show you the hospital paperwork." "Enough," the boss replied. "Even if it's true, it doesn't excuse your tardiness. You should have called to inform me." "I didn't think about it," Sarah murmured. "I was so caught up in the moment." "Precisely why you're not fit to work in a serious business." Mr. Jenkins shook his head. "My decision stands. You're fired. You can collect your things tomorrow." Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "Please, give me another chance. I'll work harder than ever." Mr. Jenkins turned away, indicating the conversation was over. "Goodbye, Miss Thompson." Sarah left the office feeling the ground beneath her feet had given way. At the reception desk, Jen saw her tear-streaked face. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "He fired you, didn't he?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. That old grump, Jen exclaimed indignantly. Don't worry, you'll find a better job. Do you want me to talk to him? No, it's no use, Sarah shook her head. You know how stubborn he is. Thank you, Jen. You've always been kind to me. The women embraced. Hang in there, dear, Jen whispered. Things will get better. Sarah packed her belongings into a cardboard box and left the office. Outside, a light drizzle fell as if nature itself mourned her failure. What now? Sarah murmured as she wandered the sidewalk, unsure where to go. She didn't want to return to her tiny apartment, where only rent bills and an empty fridge awaited her. Her feet led her toward the hospital. Sarah approached the hospital reception hesitantly, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and collected her thoughts before speaking to the nurse. Hello, she began, trying to sound confident. I brought in a patient with a heart attack this morning. Can I ask how he is? The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up from her computer and smiled at Sarah. Of course, dear. What's his last name? Thompson. Sarah Thompson. The nurse nodded and started typing. Sarah nervously fiddled with her purse strap as she waited for an answer. Yes, I see the record, the nurse finally said, her expression slightly furrowed. Unfortunately, the news isn't good. The patient is still unconscious. The doctors are doing everything possible, but his condition remains critical. Sarah felt her heart clench with alarm. Oh no, but there's hope, right? He's going to be okay, isn't he? The nurse smiled gently. There's always hope in medicine, dear. Our doctors are true professionals. They'll do their best. Sarah nodded, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill over. And his family? Have you managed to contact anyone? They must be worried sick. The nurse shook her head. Not yet. He didn't have any identification, and we haven't been able to find any. The police are working on it, but so far, no luck. My God, Sarah whispered. So he's in there alone, with nobody sitting with him, holding his hand? Unfortunately, yes, the nurse replied sympathetically. Sarah pondered for a moment, biting her lip, then looked up at the nurse with determination. Look, I know it's an unusual request, but can I sit with him? I know it's not usually allowed, but he's in there alone. No one should be alone at a time like this. The nurse hesitated, clearly torn between the rules and compassion. Well, it's against the rules, but please, Sarah insisted. I promise I won't get in the way. I'll sit quietly beside him, so he knows someone is there for him until his family arrives. The nurse sighed but then smiled, moved by Sarah's genuine concern. Okay, but not for long, all right? And if the doctors come in, you'll have to leave. Sarah's face lit up. Of course. Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means to me. Room 305, the nurse said, pointing toward the elevators. Third floor, down the hall to the left. Sarah thanked the nurse warmly and hurried to the elevators. As she rode up to the third floor, she tried to organize her thoughts. What would she say? Did it matter if he was unconscious? Deep down, Sarah felt it was important to be by his side, to talk to him, and let him know he wasn't alone. When she entered room 305, Sarah paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of the man lying motionless on the hospital bed. Tangled among cables and tubes, his chest rose and fell almost imperceptibly in time with the steady beeping of the heart monitor. His face was pale, and his features were sharp. Sarah approached the bed cautiously, trying to move quietly, though she realized it was unlikely to disturb the patient. She sat in the chair next to the bed and hesitantly reached out her hand to the man. "Hello," she said softly, surprised by how uncertain her voice sounded. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm the girl who called the ambulance. Do you remember? You got sick in the street, and I couldn't just walk by." Sarah fell silent, unsure of what else to say. She looked at the man's pale face, trying to catch any sign, but she saw nothing. Only the rhythmic beeping of the instruments and the silence of the room. You know, today's been one of those crazy days at work, where everything just piles up, she continued after a pause, smiling wryly. My boss, Mr. Jenkins, yelled at me, saying I was irresponsible and unfit to work in a serious company. I couldn't help but think, is saving a human life less important than a piece of paper? We're so stuck in our routines that we've forgotten what truly matters. Sarah sighed, but then smiled weakly as she looked at the man. But you know what? I don't regret it for a second. Yes, I've lost my job and that's scary. I have no idea how I'm going to pay the rent next month, but you're alive, and that's what matters. I'd do it again without hesitation. She squeezed his hand gently, as if trying to convey her confidence through touch. I believe you're going to recover. Surely you have family and friends waiting for you. They'll be so happy to know you're okay, and I'll be happy knowing I helped make that possible. Sarah sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the hospital. Beyond the room's door, she could hear the nurses' voices, footsteps in the hallway, and the elevator dinging. Life continued, no matter what happened. I've always dreamed of doing something big, she said again. Something that truly makes a difference. I worked as a secretary in a law firm, and every day was the same. Paperwork, phone calls, coffee for the boss. I felt like I was just existing, not really living. And today was the first time I felt like I did something worthwhile. Sarah smiled at the man's still face. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time to make a change in my life. I've always wanted to help people, but I thought I didn't have the right skills or education. Now I realize that sometimes it's enough just to not walk away, to lend a hand. She gazed wistfully out the window, beyond which she could see the evening sky. Perhaps I should think about social work or volunteering. My mother always said every challenge is an opportunity to grow. Maybe losing my job isn't the end, but the start of something new. Sarah turned back to the man, her eyes shining with newfound determination. As you can see, not only did you get help, but you helped me too. Maybe this encounter will change my life for the better. It's funny how everything in the world is connected, right? She kept talking, sharing her life, her hopes for the future, and the importance of helping each other. Sarah didn't know if the man could hear her, but she hoped her voice and presence would help in some way. You know, my grandmother always said that kindness is a language that the deaf can hear and the blind can see. I never really understood what she meant until now, but I think I'm starting to get it. Kindness is universal. Her monologue was interrupted by a nurse peeking into the room. I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but visiting hours are over, the nurse said apologetically. Sarah stood up, feeling a bit disappointed but understanding. Of course I understand. Thank you for letting me stay, she said, turning back to the man and giving his hand another squeeze. I'll be back tomorrow, I promise. Hang in there. I have faith in you, and thank you for reminding me what's really important in life. As Sarah left the room, she turned back at the door, casting one last look at the still figure in the bed. See you tomorrow, she whispered. In the hallway, Sarah paused, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Anxiety about the future, sadness over losing her job, but also a new and unexpected sense of resolve. How is he? The nurse asked, noticing the expression on Sarah's face. He hasn't changed, Sarah replied, but I believe he will improve. He has to. The nurse smiled gently. Your faith can do more than you think. Come back tomorrow if you can. It helps the patients a lot to have someone talk to them, even if it seems they can't hear. Sarah nodded. I'll make sure to come. Thank you for everything. Leaving the hospital, Sarah felt strangely calm. Despite losing her job and the uncertainty of her future, she knew she had done the right thing, and that gave her the strength to face the new day with hope and determination. The next morning, Sarah went to her former office with a heavy heart, nervously fidgeting with the strap of her bag as she rode the elevator. Sarah, how are you? Greeted Jen, Mr. Jenkins's secretary. I've been better, Sarah smiled weakly. I came to pick up the rest of my things. I'm so sorry, said Jen sympathetically. Mr. Jenkins was too harsh. Maybe I can do something to… Sarah shook her head. Thank you, Jen. Just take care of my ficus, okay? Gathering her personal items, Sarah took one last look at her workspace. So many memories, and now it was over. She left the office and headed straight to the nearest cafe with Wi-Fi to start looking for a new job. Hour after hour, she sent out resumes, but the responses were disappointing. Unfortunately, your experience does not match our requirements. We have no suitable vacancies at this time. We have reviewed your CV but have decided to move forward with other candidates. By late afternoon, Sarah felt completely drained. She took a deep breath and looked at the calendar. 3 weeks left to pay the rent. She was determined to make the most of that time. "All right, Sarah," she said aloud as if trying to convince herself. "It's time to take action. You can do this. You have to." She powered up her computer and opened job listings, her eyes quickly scanning the lines for suitable offers. "Okay, that's not right. Too far away. Oh, this looks promising," she muttered, quickly reading over cover letters, trying to put all her energy and enthusiasm into each one. "Dear sirs, I am confident that my experience and skills," she murmured while typing. "Not too formal, let's try again." Every morning, Sarah woke up at 6, forcing herself to get up even though fatigue and frustration tried to pull her back to bed. "Get up, sleepyhead," she told her reflection in the mirror. New day, new opportunities. She ate breakfast quickly while scanning job offers on her phone. "Oh, this is interesting," Sarah murmured as she sipped her coffee. "Administrative assistant at a marketing firm. I can do that." She immediately dialed the number listed in the ad. "Good morning. I'm calling about the administrative assistant position," she said, trying to make her voice sound confident and professional. "Yes, of course," responded the female voice on the other end of the line. "Can you come in today at 2 for an interview?" "Absolutely," exclaimed Sarah, feeling a surge of hope. "I'll be there. Thank you very much." She hung up the phone and raised her fist victoriously. "Got it. First interview of the day. Come on, Sarah. You can do this." At the marketing firm's office, Sarah nervously fiddled with the strap of her bag while waiting for her turn. Finally, she was invited into the office. "Miss Thompson," a middle-aged woman smiled. "I'm Carol Johnson, the HR manager. Please, have a seat." Sarah took a deep breath and began to talk about her experience and skills, speaking with enthusiasm, trying to convey her eagerness to work and learn. "Impressive, Miss Thompson," Carol nodded. "But unfortunately, we need someone with experience specifically in the marketing field." Sarah felt hope slipping away. "But I'm a fast learner," she exclaimed. "Give me a chance, and I'll prove my worth. I'm willing to work extra hours and learn all aspects of marketing in my spare time." Carol shook her head. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. You seem very motivated, but we don't have time for training. We'll contact you if anything changes." Leaving the office, Sarah leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling tears well up in her throat. "No, you can't give up," she whispered. "This is just the first interview. There will be others." And indeed, she had 2 more interviews that day, but the result was the same: polite rejections and promises to call back if anything changed. Despite the disappointment, Sarah didn't forget her promise to visit the patient in the hospital. She entered room 305, feeling some of the day's tension ease a little. "Hello," she said softly, sitting next to the bed. "I'm here again. Today, I had 3 interviews, no luck so far, but I'm not giving up." Sarah took the man's hand, feeling the strength that simple contact gave her. "A woman, the hiring manager, said today that I seem very motivated. That's something, right? Maybe I'll have better luck next time." She fell silent for a moment, looking at the man's unmoving face. "You know, sometimes I think I'm talking to myself, but then I think, you can hear me, right? I believe you're going to get better. We're both fighting our battles right now, but we'll get through it, no doubt." Sarah spoke about her job search efforts, the challenges, and the small victories. Talking to this stranger was surprisingly easy. "And you know what's the strangest part?" she smiled. "These visits to you help keep my spirits up. When I'm here, I remember why I started all this, to help someone, and it gives me the strength to keep looking for a job." As she left the room, Sarah bumped into a nurse who was already familiar to her. "Ah, Sarah." The nurse smiled warmly. "How are you today, dear?" Sarah sighed. "Honestly, it's been a tough day. 3 interviews, 3 rejections. But I'm trying not to get discouraged." The nurse shook her head sympathetically. "You know, Sarah, I see you come here every day despite your own troubles. You're an amazing person. Don't lose faith, okay?" "Thank you," Sarah said with a smile, feeling a bit better from the nurse's kind words. "I'll do my best." That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, spreading out her bills and remaining cash. "Let's see," she murmured, counting quickly. If we stretch it, we might make it for another 15 days. Then she shook her head, trying to push away the dark thoughts. No, something has to work out. It has to. Sarah opened her laptop and dove back into her job search, updating resumes and writing cover letters, ignoring her exhaustion and the late hour. This looks promising, she told herself. Administrative assistant at a publishing house. Sounds interesting. I'll send my resume right now. The clock struck midnight when Sarah finally shut down her computer and went to bed. Lying in the darkness, she thought about the previous day, the man in the hospital, and her uncertain future. Please, she whispered into the darkness, not knowing if she was speaking to fate, God, or just the universe. Please let tomorrow be better. Let something work out. Days passed, and despite Sarah's efforts, things didn't improve. One night, sitting at her kitchen table again, she counted her remaining savings and realized she couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. That's it, she whispered, looking at the figures in her notebook with a trembling voice. I can't stay here. She picked up the phone and dialed her landlord's number. After a few beeps, a familiar voice answered, Hello, this is Mr. Green. Hello, Mr. Green, Sarah replied, trying to stay calm. This is Sarah Thompson. Oh, Miss Thompson, what can I do for you? Mr. Green, I wanted to let you know that I won't be able to make the next rent payment. I'm going to have to move out. There was a pause on the other end. Miss Thompson, are you sure? Perhaps we can find some kind of solution. No, Mr. Green, Sarah shook her head, though he couldn't see her. I appreciate your understanding, but I have no other option. I've lost my job and haven't been able to find another. I'll need to move back to my hometown to stay with my parents. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Green said sincerely. You've been a great tenant. Thank you, Sarah replied quietly. I'll prepare the paperwork for the departure. I'll be out within a week. After the conversation, Sarah remained still for a long time, staring into space as the reality of her situation began to sink in. Her New York dream was ending. The next day, she went to the hospital as usual. Entering room 305, she felt a lump in her throat. Hello, she said, sitting by the bed. I'm here again, but today, I'm here to say goodbye. Sarah took the man's hand, just as she had every day for the past few weeks. You know, I had so much hope of finding a job that would let me stay in New York, but it didn't work out. I don't even have money to last a couple of months while job hunting. I have to go back to my hometown with my parents. She paused, struggling with her emotions. I'm going to miss you. It's strange, isn't it? We didn't really know each other, but these visits have become a significant part of my life. You helped me keep going, even when it was tough. Sarah squeezed his hand a bit tighter. I believe you'll recover. I hope one day you'll wake up and tell the nurses about the strange girl who came to visit you every day. I hope you'll remember me with a smile. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stood up. Goodbye, and thank you for everything. Sarah took one last look at the man's still face and left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. She didn't notice the man's hand moving slightly in response to her words. Sarah spent the last week in New York packing. Each item she put into boxes brought back memories. Remember when you bought that mug? She said to herself, carefully wrapping the ceramic mug in newspaper. It was on your first day at work. You were so excited. She found an old photo of herself and her colleagues at a company party. I wonder how they're doing. I hope Jen is doing well. Sarah methodically packed her life into cardboard boxes, trying not to dwell on what she was leaving behind. Books, clothes, memories, all finding their place in the boxes. The night before she left, Sarah sat by the window ledge, looking at the lights of New York City. Goodbye, city of my dreams, she whispered. Thank you for all the lessons, the highs and lows. Maybe I'll return someday. Until then, it's time to start a new chapter. With those words, she closed the window and continued with her final preparations. The morning of her departure was cloudy, as if New York itself was sad to see her go. Sarah took one last look at the empty apartment, sighed, and began loading the boxes into the rental car. Well, this is it, she murmured as she closed the trunk. Goodbye, big city. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Turning around, She saw a man running toward her with a bouquet of flowers. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. It was the same patient from the hospital. "Sarah," he called out, stopping in front of her, trying to catch his breath. "I'm so glad I made it in time. You're awake." Sarah, stunned, asked, "But how did you find me?" The man smiled, handing her the bouquet. "I heard everything you said while I was in a coma. Every word. When I woke up, my first thought was to find you." Sarah accepted the flowers, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Tell me you won't leave," the man said earnestly, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Here are the papers for your job and the lease for your new apartment. Please stay in New York." Sarah looked at him in amazement, then at the envelope. "But why? You don't even know me." "I do know you," he said softly. "I know you're kind and compassionate, that you didn't pass by a stranger in need. I know you don't give up, even when things seem hopeless. And I want someone like that by my side." Unable to hold back any longer, Sarah burst into tears, embracing the man. "I'm so glad you're okay." He returned the hug, and for a moment, they stood there on the sidewalk, oblivious to the surprised onlookers. "So, shall we see your new apartment?" the man asked once Sarah had calmed down a bit. She nodded, still not quite believing what was happening. He quickly drove her to a luxury apartment with views of Central Park. James, as he introduced himself, guided her through the spacious living room, modern kitchen, and a bedroom much larger than her previous apartment. "This is too much," Sarah murmured. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," James said gently. "And you should. Consider it a thank you for saving my life." They sat in the living room, and James began to tell his story. "You see, Sarah, I'm an orphan with no family to look after me, and the staff, they're often away on long business trips. They were surprised by my long absence, but they assumed I was working on a secret project and managed without me, waiting for my return." Sarah listened, holding her breath. James continued, "When I woke up and realized how much time had passed, I was in shock. But my first thought was to find you. You were the only constant in this chaos. Your voice, your stories helped me recover." "I'm glad I could help," Sarah said softly. "You did much more," James replied seriously. "And now, I want to offer you a job. I need a personal assistant, someone I can trust completely. Someone like you." Sarah was stunned. "But I don't have experience with such a large company." James smiled. "But honesty and compassion are qualities money can't buy." Sarah took a deep breath, unsure of what to say. "Say yes," urged James, and she did. The following weeks flew by as Sarah immersed herself in her new role, helping James regain control of the company. She learned quickly, picking up the nuances of the business world. James proved to be not only a brilliant businessman, but also an excellent teacher, patiently explaining complex aspects of the job and always taking time to answer her questions. "You're doing better than I expected," he said one day after Sarah gave an impressive presentation to investors. Sarah blushed at the praise. "I have a good teacher," she replied, their eyes meeting for a moment. Slowly, something more than a professional relationship began to develop between them. Sarah found herself admiring James's profile as he looked thoughtfully out the office window. James began touching her arm more frequently during their discussions. One evening, after working late on an important project, they ordered dinner to the office. Exhausted but satisfied, they sat on the couch, enjoying their meal and conversation. "You know, Sarah," James said suddenly, setting his plate aside, "I never really believed in fate, but now I think our meeting was meant to be." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. James took her hand. "I mean that you changed my life, not just by saving me on the street, but by showing me that there's still kindness and selflessness in the world. You've become an important part of my life." Sarah held her breath, looking into his eyes. "James, he gently brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was soft and tentative, like a question, and Sarah responded, feeling the warmth spread through her body. When they finally pulled away, James smiled. "I've fallen in love with you, Sarah Thompson. Your voice, your kindness, your strength. I want to be with you, not just at work but in life." Tears of joy filled Sarah's eyes. "I love you too, James," she whispered. You've restored my faith in miracles." They kissed again, and in that moment, they realized their lives would never be the same. They faced many challenges and trials ahead, but they knew they could overcome anything together.